These are not exactly experiments. These are unusual events that happen which allow researcher the chance to study a question of interest that's normally very difficult to answer. One example would be if you're trying to study the effects of immigration, it's very difficult to do that because normally immigrants are going to cities and countries that are doing well economically, and that fact and other factors might make it hard to compare places that are getting more immigrants and less. And an actual experiment that I studied to try and study the effects of immigration was the Mariel boat lift, which was an unusual event that happened in 1980 when about 150,000 people left Havana, the port of Mariel, very near Havana in Cuba, and came to Miami in the course of just a few weeks. So this provided a very rapid increase in the number of immigrants in the Miami area. And the reason why they came to Miami was nothing to do with the conditions in Miami, but rather the fact that Fidel Castro had made it possible for them to leave at that time. And so I studied what happened in the Miami labor market after these immigrants had arrived and whether there was a big effect on native workers in the Miami labor market. Another example I've studied would be the effects of raising the minimum wage, where, for example, minimum wage would increase in one state. For example, the study I did with my colleague Alan Kruger years ago was in New Jersey, and in another nearby state, the minimum wage was held constant. And so we compared what happened to the fast food restaurants in those two states. And that, again, provided a nice analysis where we could actually study the effects of minimum wage with an understanding that in the state where the minimum wage didn't go up, that wasn't going on, and we could use that as a comparison to study, measure the effects more precisely. When I'm thinking about topics for my research, I normally have in mind a lot of long-standing questions about the labor market that economists have actually asked and tried to answer for many years. And normally my research is spurred by some new data set that becomes available, or something like one of these natural experiments involving an increase in minimum wage or a change in immigration or some other feature that makes it possible to come back and look at that question again. So the list of questions I am interested in normally focus on labor market outcomes, and I've always been particularly interested in lower wage people and how they survive in the labor market, and how different factors are affecting how well they're doing in the labor market. If I was to try and highlight some of my results that are both interesting and new, I might point to some of the work I've been doing recently studying the effects of which particular employer a worker works at. And in this research, I've been using data from a couple of different European countries, Germany and Portugal in particular, in some of my most recent studies. And this work has shown that the wages that a worker can receive will depend importantly on which particular firm they get hired at. If you, for example, get hired by a large bank, probably that's going to be a pretty good job and you'll receive a bit higher wage than if you had to work at a small retail store in your neighborhood. And it turns out that that's very important in understanding lots of different things about the labor market. For example, why do some people have much different wages than others? In other words, the so-called question about wage inequality. Well, one of the big reasons is because there are these different wages available, and some people get those good jobs and some people don't. Another example is how does that affect the male and female wages? And again, it turns out that on average, women tend to work at employers that don't offer such a high wage. And so some of the wage disadvantage that women suffer relative to men is due to just to the identity of the employers that they work for. So that's an example of a kind of phenomenon I think that's pretty widespread and important in understanding what's going on in the labor market. So my research is probably useful for public policy decision making in a number of different areas. Research that I did on the minimum wage, for example, I think has helped people understand a little bit better what are the costs and benefits of raising the minimum wage. Historically, critics of the minimum wage thought that higher minimum wage had significant costs in terms of lost jobs, and my research suggested that those costs might be smaller in many cases. My research on education has shown that people with more schooling earn higher wages, and it doesn't seem to be simply a result of the fact that they have skills, attributes, family background features, better educated father and mother and so on, that would mean they would earn more otherwise. In other words, it seems to be that actually it's the schooling per se that matters for their outcomes. And that's important because if a government wants to try and help raise earnings of middle and lower income people, for example, one policy would be expanding access to public education. And I've also done work on immigration, which has obviously important public policy context. I'm working on a study of a program in a big urban district in the United States, which offers a specialized class for the highest achieving kids, the children who've scored the highest in the standardized tests in the previous year. And this kind of program is what's called a tracking program. Historically, people have been concerned that these programs, although they might benefit or might not benefit the children who are in the program, they might lead to disadvantage for the children who are excluded from the tracking class. And so I've been trying to understand how these programs work and whether just the students who are in the program benefit, whether other students also benefit, or whether the other students might be disadvantaged when such a program exists.